Hey everybody, welcome to Goshen Prepping. I'm really glad you're here. I have shocking truth coming to you about an economic collapse that is imminent. And first I want to talk about that people think it's going to be sending us back to an agrarian society, or they'll say it'll simply just take us from that high rank in the New World Order. That's not true. It's far worse. I mean, far worse. And I want to show you through this video, stick through it, because this is fearful. This is very scary. But we can't sugarcoat what is coming, because there's no way, on the very least, the feds can continue to print and borrow money like they are, and everything will continue to be just fine. And for us as preppers, you and me, our job is to get through that horrible mess of the whole collapse and come out the other side alive. Because that's the scary part. A lot of people will not make it to the other side alive, unfortunately. Now, there's a lot of naysayers who say this will never happen, and that's simply not true because history proves otherwise. Again, the way the feds are printing and borrowing money, there's no way we can stop a collapse from happening. It's going to happen. And we see examples in situations like the Weimar Republic in Germany eventually leading to Nazi control. Of course, the U.S. Great Depression, the collapse of the Soviet Union and the Soviet bloc countries in the late 80s, early 90s, Argentina, Zimbabwe, Venezuela. And all these are examples of the government printing off money and making hyperinflation. And that's not the only reason for some of these, but it is on its way already. For the fact, I want to go through some things that we usually see in progression. Here's how it usually starts, and we end up down here. We think that basically it's something in the future. The process has already started, and that's why it's just a matter of time. Because the first thing we see in all these situations always is simply just inflation. Right now normally we see like a usual 2% growth in inflation, about 2%. Sometimes it goes higher, sometimes it goes lower. And that is a normal order of things. I mean, it doesn't have to be the way the governments do it. They want it that way. But we usually see a little bit of inflation. The inflation that we've seen in the last few years has been astronomical in the United States. And have you gone grocery shopping? It seems to be in the last 12 months, it's gone even higher. In my mind, it seems like it's even doubled. I know it's not that much. But when I get my grocery bill for buying groceries, holy cow, it's absolutely crazy. And because of the inflation, or at least coinciding with the inflation, often we see shortages. Because as the companies make the food and put it on the shelves, if people can't afford to buy certain foods, then the companies will stop making it because they're not going to take it to the stores where it's going to go to waste. And not only that, but all the different things we've seen as far as animal culling, we've seen shortages from drought and weather conditions. I mean, the list goes on and on. Shortages have already happened in the stores, but because of inflation and the way things are going, we're not in the clear yet by any means. It is certainly going to get much worse. In fact, when we talk about the problems with fertilizer, for the fact that in a lot of different types of agricultural harvests coming in, we're seeing a lagging effect because right now we may have a lot of stuff in the store, but that's stuff that came from last year's harvest. And since we've had problems last year, well, the problems are going to escalate as time goes on. Now are we going to see shortages here and there, but we're going to see overall a lot of shortages kicking in very soon, probably this fall, certainly by next year. Now, as the government tries social programs, as it tries to help out society, as it tries to fill in the blank, I mean, everything from student loan forgiveness to helping out other countries to there's so many reasons why the government says, let's print off and make more money instead of the common sense of maybe we shouldn't do it because we're in big trouble. So as the government prints more, it actually causes more inflation and more shortages as well. But what it does is it starts collapsing everything that's happening as far as our monetary value. Think about it this way, if the government prints off twice as much money as we normally have, then your money is only going to be worth, practically speaking, half as much. And as the feds raise interest rates to counteract that, it's not because inflation from our spending, that's what they claim it is, by the way. It's from the government printing off money. The feds are raising interest rates. It stifles the economy even more. And we start seeing problems in, well, how many times are you trying to buy stuff now between possibly a house or a car or getting a loan for something? The interest rates are through the roof. They're talking about them coming down. But you know what? When it actually happens, I'll believe it. When all of this happens and we're not seeing a progressive economy, we're not seeing a progress of our infrastructure, it starts collapsing. In fact, I would challenge you to do this. Go Google videos. Sometimes on YouTube, you can find old videos of like New York City back in the heyday of, the 20s or 30s or 40s, or the list goes on. And it's amazing. As you see these old cars driving down the road and they've recolorized it, they're really just fun to watch. Look at the infrastructure. Look at the road. Look at the buildings. And it doesn't have to be New York. Anywhere they show these videos, everything is brand new and beautiful. And if you live in the city, you will know that everything is not brand new and beautiful. we see a crumbling infrastructure. They're trying to work on roads. Roads are a mess. They're trying to update bridges. The bridges are a mess. They're trying to work on our power grid. Our power grid is a mess. Unfortunately, there's just so much money going out into all these other programs and not simply maintaining our infrastructure. We're seeing an infrastructure collapse. And that's another thing we see too. The government, even though they're printing off tons of money, are not taking care of the problems that we need to have taken care of in the country. That is another sign and step toward hyperinflation and then eventually a total collapse. So all of this, all three of those, inflation, shortages, and a crumbling society, all those things where the government prints out money, is all leading to hyperinflation. It's a downward spiral. Those three things will continue over and over again. And we've seen in past cases, which we talked about, for example, a loaf of bread, instead of costing like $1, it will literally cost in some of these countries $1 million for a loaf of bread. And of course, in your mind, you're thinking, I couldn't afford $1 million. No, we understand that the money's so worthless. Trying to rack up $1 million is actually pretty easy because your paycheck, instead of getting paid, let's say you get paid $1,000 a week, I'm just making something up, now you're getting paid $1 million a week, but it's not buying anything because there's shortages and inflation and everything else too. So instead of actually buying today a loaf of bread and a can of corn and all this stuff, you really just may put all your money into one loaf of bread. In fact, what we'll see in those countries is they buy that loaf of bread or that jug of milk so fast because today it's $1 million, tomorrow it's going to be 1.25 million. So the hyperinflation just skyrockets out of control and this downward spiral continues. Soviet bloc, when we talk about Yugoslavia, it was so bad at one point that the country started printing out $500 billion bills. I mean, they're not dollars, obviously, dinars, if I recall, from Yugoslavia at that time. $500 billion bills. Could you imagine that, taking the grocery store? And you think, wow, I can buy everything. You'd be lucky if you build a loaf of bread with that $5 billion bill. And now as the infrastructure collapses, we're going to see problems as far as like farms. Farms will still grow food. You'll still see crops and everything come up. But it gets to the point where people can't actually afford it. And it's amazing because, in regular culture, farmers are often put into classification of, not very wealthy, but, they're wealthy in their family. They're wealthy in everything they have. They live a very rich life, but you can't afford a lot of stuff as a farmer. And what happens is, even dairy farmers and stuff too. But then during these situations, they actually become rich. Because what happens is they have all this food growing. They're the only ones that really do have the food. And since food prices have gone up so much, they can sell the food and actually rake in quite a few dollars. The problem is not everybody has the money to buy the food. So of course we see crime increasing on farms as well. Not only that, but cows are still giving milk. But in that case, no one can afford to buy the milk, or very few. Because again, they'll go to buy it for $1 million. The next day it'll go up even higher. And it's very difficult to try to make ends meet to be able to buy the stuff from those farmers. Then, and here's where the collapse part starts happening. And this is where we have to worry about it. Because again, if we just get put into an agrarian society, it sounds good to me, honestly. I would like to grow my own crops in the backyard. Or we'd like to go back to what it was like in the 1800s. Sounds good to me when things were simpler. It's not quite that simple though. Because think about this. The 350 million people in America, somewhere around there, right now depend on grocery stores. Right now they depend on all the food being delivered to them. 80-90% of the population lives in cities, so the only way for them to get food is not by a farm. It's on the roof of the skyscrapers, obviously. They go to the grocery store and pick up their food. Well, understand that if we see all of this interstate commerce and we see the infrastructure collapsing and shortages, inflation, and people need to buy a loaf of bread for $1 million, what's going to happen? These people in the city are going to be the worst off in this situation. And that's why I always talk about stockpiling, by the way, so we can try to weather the storm as much as possible. But they say, well, it actually came out from a famous book. I forgot who said it. But there's only 9 meals between humanity and anarchy. In other words, look at civilization today. I mean, there's hunger. There's hunger all over the United States, but not like what we're talking about here. Right now, cities are being fed. The people in cities are getting enough food. Cut off that food supply. Most grocery stores only have enough food for about 3 days. If they are wiped clean 3 days later, now there's nothing. 9 meals. That's typically 3 days, by the way. But let's go ahead and say they only have 1 meal a day. That's a good diet. So 9 days later, suddenly now there's starvation for everybody across the country. And that's the problem. The problem is not going to an agrarian society. An agrarian society can only hold a civilization so high. We're way up here. So if you take out the infrastructure, what's going to happen to this giant group of people? We're talking about massive chaos. We're talking about massive violence. We're talking about the worst case scenario. So being an agrarian society is great. Getting to that agrarian society is going to be a nightmare. I'm not saying could be a nightmare. It's going to be a nightmare. And that's where we have to worry about hyperinflation. Bad times are coming. If the government said, you know what, hold on, I can't believe we're borrowing this much money, we need to stop printing it and borrowing it right now and turn it around, we wouldn't be having the discussion. But instead, it's continuing down that path. I don't care which side of the aisle you're talking about. They spend money like it's going crazy. And eventually, it's going to lead to hyperinflation. When it does, the system's going to collapse. When it does, 80-90% of the people who live in cities are going to be looking for food. It is going to be massive chaos. And it's only the people, I don't want to say only people in the country, but if you have food piles, stocked up and you have all these things we've been talking about in grocery prep for a while, you're going to fare a lot better, especially if you can protect yourself. So if you are in a city, I'm going to tell you right now, you need to have a place to go. You need to find some distant cousin who has a farm and make an agreement with them. I want to come out there. Or possibly, I just talked with some really nice lady who lived in the city, and she said she has a place available in the southern states, some property to go to, and crap, it's fan. There you go. And I'm not saying everybody can buy property right now. There's lots of things you can do, but you have to be creative because especially if you have kids, we're talking about some major problems. And by the way, I haven't talked about all the problems yet. There's more to come because the chaos that's going to envelop because of this hyperinflation is going to be incredible. Because I want you to think about all those places we talked about when we saw hyperinflation before, from Venezuela to Soviet bloc, Argentina, Weimar Republic in Germany. Those are not the United States. Those are not in the U.S. where things are held to such a high degree. We have so much food. We have so much infrastructure. We have so many cars, all this stuff. The higher you go, the United States is the top, by the way, the harder the crash is going to be. If you already live in the Weimar Republic, we're talking about in the 20s, there's really not a lot of technology anyway. There's a lot of people who could survive. We're not talking about the Great Depression into the 30s. 25% of the people left the cities at that point. 25% head out in the country. Most of America was country farmland anyway back then. They could take it in. But now, 80-90% of the people in the cities are going to be heading in the country. This is going to be exceedingly horrible. There's so many different things we could talk about as far as problems go. This certainly remains at one of the tops because it is going to happen unless the government turns around. Okay, so when desperation occurs, people don't have food. They turn desperate. 9 meals now. Now it's anarchy. Even the nicest people they ever meet. Here's the Jones who lived next door. What a nice guy. He's the nicest guy I ever met, isn't he? Sometimes he'll even come mow my lawn for me. That's great. But understand, you stockpiled and you have all this food set aside, and Mr. Jones didn't. They ate all their food in the last 3 days. With his kids, with anarchy happening, you think he's going to say, hey, you know what? Remember that time I mowed your lawn? I need some of your food. I mean, he might do that. And you might say, look, I don't really have any either. I'm going to tell you right now, any father in the country who has children, who doesn't have food, and you do, that very nice man who mowed your lawn is going to become violent. Because in his mind, he's going to say, why is it you have food, but I don't? You're better than me? Your children are more special than mine? We already have this sense of entitlement in America anyway. It's going to turn bad and violent. So the last two things we're going to see after this happens with hyperinflation are the dangerous parts in which we're going to see a massive die-off in the country. And that is the frightening part. One is looting. Right now, not right now, but in the last couple of years, we've seen a lot of looting in stores. That's not the looting I'm talking about. All that's going to happen too. We're talking about looting and thieving from everything from warehouses to food production plants. It's all going to be gone. And then simultaneously, we're going to see massive, uncontrollable riots. If you haven't seen this already in the past few days, one of the police officers in Britain said, why aren't you stopping this happening? He goes, there's more than them than there is us. That's the way we are. Our taxes make it so we can only hire for so many police officers. And eventually, if there's more than them than there are as far as us goes, the rioting is going to get significantly worse and we're not going to be able to stop it. We're going to see a 100% overall total collapse of society where they're coming onto your door and trying to get your food. You need to take actions and watch these videos that we have. We have a lot of them in our channel to be able to try to counteract this. Understand that your average everyday family, once you take that food away, is going to become a violent family. Scary times are ahead, all because of government continuously blowing money like it's going out of style. A lot of people don't make the connection, but that is the problem. Our only solution as preppers is to stockpile and prepare and protect yourself and have strategies and drill and train. And that's what we do. And that's what Goshen prepping is all about. We have scary times ahead. And let's not even talk about the war aspect that's probably going to come into play too. But we have some scary times, and this is the biggest thing we really have to be able to prepare for and be ready, because it will be nothing less than absolute catastrophe when it does happen.